Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for popping in again. I just want to go over a few things before we go into our Bible study for today. Yeah, one of the things I realized watching my video back from the last time I posted was that I come off a little bit shy and a little bit like weird. So I realized that I am quite shy in front of the camera now. I don't know if it's because I haven't recorded in a while or because the times that I record in between are quite far between each other. But I am a little bit shy and stiff in front of the camera, so I'm going to work on being a bit more like myself. So if you do see a difference in my future stuff compared to my old stuff, just know that I'm just being myself. I'm loosening up a little bit more and getting a bit more comfortable here. So I don't want you to feel like maybe I'm being a bit fake or being something that I'm not or anything like that. Another reason that I feel like I'm a little bit shy is because I'm scared to open myself up to criticism, because I am speaking about the Bible and about my revelation of the Word. And I am not a pastor, I'm not a theologian, not anyone that is qualified, that has like qualifications behind me to speak and to preach, but it's stuff that God has laid on my heart that I do want to share with you and hopefully impact and help somebody else in their walk with God and in their life. And I just hope that you take that into consideration and just be kind in the comments and that kind of thing. The other thing I want to say is thank you for sticking around. I know that I don't post often, and the reason that I don't post often is because the kind of content that I'm putting out there, I really want to be real and organic, and it's not something that you can manufacture. It's really something that I kind of wait on God to make sure that it's Him and it's not me that wants to put this thing out there. So that's a part of the reason that I don't post very consistently, but I will continue to post as time goes on. I can't tell you when and where, but I will continue to post. So thanks for sticking around. Please like and subscribe and comment if you do have anything to say. I'd love to hear from you. And let's get into our Bible study. So in my last video, I shared a bit about how I was orphaned when I was 17 years old. And since I was orphaned and since my parents died, I lost a lot of stuff. You know, when my parents died, they weren't the only people and thing that I lost. I lost a lot of contact with a lot of my family, contact with some of my friends. I lost a part of myself as well. And with that came a lot of shame. One of the things that I've really dealt with in my life is shame. And I really feel like it's something that I want to address and speak about today. I was ashamed that I was this girl that had parents that died in this terrible way. I was ashamed that I was a girl that didn't have parents. You know, I was kind of parenting myself and living alone and finding my feet through all these things, and I dealt with a lot of shame because of this. And I remember when I was in university, people would be like, oh, so where are you from? What high school did you go to? What do your parents do? And whenever I would tell people I was an orphan, it would always be followed with a high shame. And since then, God has done a great work in my life and released me from a lot of shame. But there's still shame that I deal with today. I still deal with the fact that I don't know how to answer people when they ask me how my brother is, because I don't speak to my brother. We aren't in contact. I'm ashamed of my rash and irrational behavior that I've done in the past. It still affects my relationships to this day. So, I mean, I've been dealing with shame, and it's something that I know a little bit about. About 3 weeks ago, God took me back to the story of Jacob. And I love the story of Jacob in Genesis. Jacob is, to sum him up in one word, relatable. He is very relatable. He is selfish, short-sighted. He's a mama's boy, and he's a pretty sly guy. And the one thing that really stood out for me in Jacob's story was just how he dealt with shame for pretty much all his life. And it literally started from the time that he was in the womb. So Jacob's story is not a short story. Jacob's story spans from Genesis 25 to Genesis 35. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to read the entire story of Jacob. I'd really like to encourage you to go and read the story, read it like a real person that lived through this and that really went through this stuff, and I promise you the story is going to come alive for you. So what I'm going to do is share my personal revelation and some of the highlights in Jacob's story for me. We are introduced to Jacob in Genesis 25 verse 6. Jacob's mother struggled to fall pregnant, and eventually she did fall pregnant, and she was having these hectic cramps and eventually found out that she was having twins. And I don't know if it was a doctor or what it was in those days, but let's say she went to the doctor, and the doctor said to her, listen, you've got 2 kids inside of you and they are fighting and wrestling. So Esau and Jacob were at each other's throats from the time that they were in the womb. When it was time for his mother to give birth, it was probably a really hard one for her. And the way that they came out was Esau came first and Jacob came after him, but Jacob was holding Esau's heel. And the impression that it gives us is that Jacob was fighting to come out first. And in those days, if you were a firstborn son, there was a lot that came with that. You would get a blessing, you would get an inheritance from your father, and obviously being first meant a lot to Jacob. So literally from the time that he comes into the world, he's thinking of himself, he's fighting to be first, and he's kind of against his brother. On top of that, Jacob and Esau are complete opposites. Esau is this red, hairy, manly person, and Jacob is someone that the Bible describes as very quiet, maybe what we would consider in today's day and age a pretty boy, maybe someone that was a bit more feminine, a guy that likes cooking. And I just want to read how the Bible describes him. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament and preferred staying at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game that Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Esau really had the favor of his dad, and Jacob was a mama's boy. As the years go on, Jacob didn't give up just because he came out of the womb second. He fought for his brother's blessing and inheritance, and eventually he gets it. He secures Esau's blessing and he secures his inheritance. And Esau's kind of salty about that. He gets pretty bitter about it. So because the way that Jacob has gotten these things, the way that he got the blessing and the way that he got his brother's inheritance was through trickery and what is the word I'm looking for? Manipulation. And through manipulation, he decides that he's gonna run. He becomes what I think and perceive as ashamed, and he is scared as well. He's stolen his brother's blessing and his brother is mad. So his mother tells him to run, and he eventually does run. As he leaves, I get the sense that Jacob is filled with remorse and regret, and he wants to be better. And that's the moment that he meets with God. God meets with him at his lowest point, when he has absolutely nothing, when he feels like he is nothing. God meets with him in a dream, and God gives him a promise. And I think that's really powerful. For me, one of the things that I really got out of it was that God will give you the promise before you are reformed. He'll show you what he has for you before you are even repentative, before you even sorry about what you've done. God can show you what he can do for you. Jacob secures the promise from God, and he makes his way to his uncle Laban, who turns out to be an even bigger trickster and a bigger sly guy than Jacob himself is. And there was another lesson in that for me. Laban had done so much to Jacob. Jacob wanted to marry Rachel. Laban gave him Leah. And then he worked another 7 years to get Rachel. And all through this time, Laban tricks him and changes his wages and does all these things. But Jacob stays honest, and he works hard for what he needs to get, and God blesses him through that. There was another beautiful lesson in that for me. I learned and saw that even though Jacob was living right and trying to live a godly life and pursue godliness, it didn't pull the seeds out of the ground that he had sown when he wasn't living right. He had to deal with that harvest, and he had to reap it, and that came in the form of his uncle Laban. Jacob didn't only have drama with his uncle Laban, but he had drama with the woman in his life as well. Jacob's life plays out like a series that you would watch on Netflix. It's crazy. He marries Leah, who, shame, the Bible describes as, oh wait, let me look for it. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah and the younger was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. So in other words, Leah was not pretty. she wasn't his first choice. But after working 14 years for these women, he secures them both. These are both his wives, and Leah has her handmaid and Rachel has her handmaid, and Leah is able to have a baby and Rachel's not able to have a baby. Then they throw the handmaids at him and he sleeps with the handmaids and has babies with the handmaids, and it's just like, it's a lot. He has a lot of drama with the woman in his life. And like I said, go and read the story for yourself. Get your own perspective, get your personal revelation. But he had a lot of drama in his life with the woman. Eventually, a couple of years later, Jacob decides that it's time for him to leave his uncle Laban's house. So he had made his uncle Laban a really wealthy man, and he says so in the scripture as well. Jacob says to his uncle Jacob says to his uncle Laban, listen, I've done the most for you. I've made you wealthy. You've got all this cattle. You've got all this stock. Let me go and give to me what I have worked for. And this is what his uncle Laban says to him. What wages do you want? Laban asked. Jacob replied, don't give me anything. Just do this one thing and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks. Let me inspect your flock and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted along with the black sheep. Give these to me as the wages. In future, when you check on the animals you have given me as wages, you'll see that I've been honest. If you find in my flock goats without speckles or spots or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I have stolen from you. All right, Laban replied, it will be as you say. But that very day, Laban went out and removed all the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. So Laban tricked him again. He tried to get out of this deal that he had with him, but in the end, God was faithful. God was really watching over Jacob, and he took his flock and he went. At this point in his life, he is ready to go back home and face the music. I think this is like some 20 odd years after he's stolen his brother's blessing. So it's a good chunk of time that he's gotten, to reflect and be a better person. And he's ready to go back and face his brother and ask for his brother's forgiveness. And hopefully reconcile and hope and pray to God that Esau doesn't kill him on sight. So that's where I want to leave my explanation of Jacob's story. This is by no means the end of his story. He still has a good chunk of things that happened to him in the Bible if you do go back and read it. But there's a few things that I took from this part of the story, and I want to share that with you. So Jacob has a lot to be ashamed of, and this is what I find so relatable about Jacob. Jacob may have been ashamed of the nature that he had. He may have been ashamed that he was this feminine mama's boy that preferred to stay home and cook, while he had this manly brother that was super hairy and big and went and killed game. And I'm pretty sure that brought about a lot of shame for him, and it must have been difficult for him because of how he wasn't able to win his father's favor. And that's one of the reasons that his father favored his brother Esau. It's also safe, I think, and feel to assume that he didn't meet the standards of what a man was in this era of time. A man might have been like manly huntsman, somebody that was with the guys, that looked a certain way, and Jacob just didn't fit into that mold. Jacob must have been ashamed of how sly and manipulative he was. Jacob was so manipulative. He was a thief. When he saw that his brother was hungry and was willing to give up his inheritance for a bowl of beans, He manipulated him and extorted him and took what he wanted and what he needed to get from him. Jacob was also a mama's boy, and also comes across, like, in that season of his life, as somebody that just couldn't think for himself. And I'm just going to leave that there for all the mama's boys. Another thing that he could have been ashamed of was that he was a trickster. He tricked his father into giving him Esau's blessing by wearing the sheep's skin on his hand so that he could come across as hairy. And the other thing that he goes on to do is that he uses God's name in vain. He says to his father, "The God of your father has sent me." And that's using God's name in vain. I'm pretty sure that's something that he was really ashamed of. He was a coward. He was a coward. He ran out of fear for his life when he knew and realized that his brother was coming to kill him after stealing his blessing. These are all things that, nobody, or not nobody, but people are not meant to be proud of. Being a liar, being a trickster, being a manipulative person is not something to be proud of, and that's all stuff that Jacob dealt with in his life. But for me, the beauty in Jacob's story is that God still meets with him, and God still gives him a promise in spite of all of these things. The thing that was amazing about the story for me is that God meets with him before he is reformed, before he is a new person. When he's a liar, when he's a trickster, when he uses God's name in vain, when he's manipulative, that's when God meets with him. And on top of that, gives him a promise of what he will do for him in the future. So we can see this in Genesis 28, verses 10 to 22. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled towards Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamt of a stairway that reached up from earth to heaven, and he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are laying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west and the east, the north and the south. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I'm with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything that I have promised you." And that's the promise that God gives Jacob in that moment and in that season of his life. And I thought that that was really beautiful. Even though Jacob had faced many trials and tribulations, even after receiving that promise from God, God still did so much for him in the midst of all of that. And the first one is that God made Jacob a promise. We just read that in Genesis 28, and he gives him the promise in spite of himself. He added to him, he gave him wives and children. And we can see that in Genesis 30, verses 1 to 24. He increases his wealth. That we see how God increased Laban and increased Jacob in wealth in Genesis 30, verse 43. He made him an honest man. We see how he was honest even though his uncle Laban tried to trick him and rob him in Genesis 25, verse 43. God blesses him and gives him a new name in Genesis 32, verses 22 to 32. And finally, in that moment, his shame is released. I'm going to read that scripture to you because it's really beautiful. During the night, Jacob got up with his 2 wives and his 2 servant wives and 11 sons and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob alone in the camp. And a man came and wrestled with him until dawn began to break. When he saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of socket. And then the man said, let me go, for dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and man, and have won. God gave him a new name. Jacob is no longer a trickster. He is Israel, the person that has many descendants. One of the last things that God does for him is he reconciles him to his brother. And that I also thought was pretty beautiful. Jacob sends his brother a letter. And it just shows you how kind of mousy and quiet Jacob is. He sends him a letter with the hopes that he can kind of diffuse the situation before his brother sees him. Then Jacob sent messages ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir in the land of Edom. He told them, "Give this message to my master Esau. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Until now, I've been living with Uncle Laban, and I now own cattle, donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I've sent these messengers to inform my lord of my coming, hoping he'll be friendly to me." So with the hopes that his brother's not going to kill him on sight when he sees him, he sends this message. And God reconciles his brother so beautifully to him. It says, "And Jacob went ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept." So these are all the things that God does for Jacob. And one of the main lessons that I take from the story of Jacob is just how selfish we are. And even though that's how we are instinctively, and that's how we've been made, and that is the fall of man and that original sin inside of us, in spite of that, God is still able to appear to us, give us promises, work in our hearts, and give us everything that he's promised to give us, and also just be with us through it all. He promised Jacob that he would never leave him, and he never did. Jacob was born selfish. He came out of the womb sly, and that's just how he was. But God met with him after his greatest trick and gave him a glimpse of his future. And Jacob was diligent to take that moment and run with it. He took that promise and he ran with it. And I think one of the mistakes that I personally make is, I get a promise from God, or I see something that God wants to do in my life and through me, and a couple of weeks later, a couple of months later, I'm just like, "Oh Lord, when are you going to do what you said you would do? Why is it taking so long to come to pass?" Jacob was diligent to take it moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year. I mean, he worked 14 years for his wives. He worked 7 years to get Rachel, who is the one that he really loved. He was so diligent. He was so patient. And it's one of the things that I realized was like, if we can just take it moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, after we've received that promise, it's like before you know it, you will look around and find yourself in that promise. You will look around and find that God has been faithful. You'll look around and find that God has done everything that he said he would do for you. I think especially in the times that we're living in right now, we're still in quarantine even though we've leveled down here in South Africa, and sometimes it's really hard. You'll start the day feeling like you're failing. You'll start the day feeling like you just aren't getting anything right. And because there's all this time that we have indoors now to ourselves, it's almost like the hours and the minutes and the days kind of blur into each other. And it's a perfect opportunity to start again in the next moment. It's a perfect opportunity to start right now. You don't have to worry about starting on Monday. You don't have to worry about starting tomorrow. You don't have to worry about starting next month, because it's like there is no sense of time right now. And that's exactly what Jacob did. It just took it moment by moment, week by week, day by day, month by month, year by year, and before he knew it, he found himself in the thick of the promise of God. And I really believe that that's what God can do for us as well. I really want to encourage you that if you're someone that is dealing with a lot of shame right now, maybe you are dealing with, like me, dealing with being a young orphan, being a divorcee, being single, being whatever it is that you find yourself in right now. I don't know exactly where you are, and I don't know exactly how that feels, because I may not have been there, and I haven't been where you are. I'm not you. I'm not where you are at emotionally right now in that moment, so I have no idea what you're dealing with. But I'd like to leave you with a beautiful promise from God found in Isaiah 61 verse 7. It says, "Instead of shame and dishonor, You will enjoy a double share of honor. You will possess a double portion of prosperity in your land, and everlasting joy will be yours. So be encouraged. You are who God says you are. Thank you so much for watching and for getting to the end of this video. I hope that it blessed you. I hope that it has touched you and impacted you in some way. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.